talking about tricks to achieving calorie targets. Now, first and foremost, when you hear the word tricks or secrets in the fitness industry, you should not only walk away, you should sprint the other direction. But there's going to be one exception to that rule. I would qualify these as tricks. They're not so often talked about or heard of, and at the same time, they're really nice to use when trying to change body composition. So first off, let's go ahead and kind of briefly discuss and go over each one of them. Calorie density, that's just going to be talking about the calories per gram of each given food. There's a giant food bank or database online that shows you the least calorie dense foods and the most calorie dense foods, and they're really good to utilize, like I said, when you want to change body composition. Second is going to be the fullness factor. The satiety index, or just the satiating factors of food, has been studied for a very long time. In fact, Susanna Holt in 1995 did a really well done study on it, on satiety in food, and studies have consistently found that the actual weight of food is one of the biggest components of satiety, along with ingredients or nutrients rather, like fiber and protein. The content of those nutrients are going to decide how satiating any given food is. This is a 1 through 5 scale grading each and every food on its fullness. So some examples of less filling foods are going to be honey and Snickers bars, and more filling foods are going to be like bean sprouts and steak. Lastly is going to be the process of food. That's exactly how it sounds. It's the process that food goes through before it gets to you. But one thing I do want to just kind of throw in here is that just because something is ultra processed does not mean it's inherently bad. That's thrown around far too often. In fact, there's actually, we'll cover in just a minute, there's actually really good utilization that you can make of foods that are ultra processed, and things like whey protein, egg whites, casein protein, a series of other foods like that that are ultra processed, again, aren't inherently bad, are great to include in your diet. Heck, even the characterization of good and bad with food is probably damaging how we look at it, but that's a rant for another day. Looking at calorie density, we're going to start back up here. If I want to be in a calorie deficit, I'm trying to lose body fat, I'm going to look at this calorie density log and look at the foods that are the least calorie dense to utilize to feel more full throughout the day and achieve less calories. So examples of less calorie dense food are lettuce, watermelon, potatoes. Actually, got to take a second to talk about potatoes. Potatoes, for some reason, are seen as a bad diet food or a bad food to eat when you're trying to become in a calorie deficit, mostly because it's higher on the glycemic index scale, but this couldn't be further from the truth. It weighs a ton, and it's not very calorie dense whatsoever. It's a really good carbohydrate to have on the plate when you're trying to be in a deficit. It is very filling, it weighs a lot, and it's not calorie dense whatsoever. And then on the opposite end of things for calorie density, if I want to be in a surplus and I just can't eat enough, my stomach's not big enough, I feel like I'm going to puke after every meal. It's one of the most common things you hear when someone's trying to gain weight and they're not so successful in doing it. Well, let's look at foods that are more calorie dense. There's been a number of different studies that show that no matter the calorie density of a food, people usually eat the same weight of food before they start to feel full, before they start to feel lethargic. So if we are replacing that weight of food with things that are more calorie dense or less calorie dense, it'll make it easier to achieve calorie targets, a lot easier. So for the weight gain example, black beans, peanuts, olive oil, maybe not olive oil, we're not going to take shots at olive oil, even though I've seen it, but these are going to be the kind of foods that are better to include when trying to be in a surplus. Now back to the fullness factor, I really like cross-referencing these two. So I'll give you an example real quick. In the fullness factor, we're going to look for foods that are more filling, but at the same time are less calorie dense. So a good example here would be watermelon. Watermelon has a score of 4.5, which is an awesome fullness factor score, very satiating food, but at the same time, it is not very calorie dense whatsoever. It's only 0.30 in its calorie density, so not calorie dense, very filling. What would it be good for? When you're trying to be in a deficit. So when you're trying to lose weight, watermelon and a lot of foods like it, things that are very filling yet not very calorie dense, are going to be great foods for that situation. On the opposite end, things that are very calorie dense and not very filling are going to be foods that are good for trying to be in a surplus. So again, utilizing these for body composition changes is paramount and very helpful. And lastly, getting back to the process of food, there's a terrific study, Hall et al. 2019, that looked at is a crossover design double-blind study that looked at individuals going on a 2-week ultra-processed diet versus an unprocessed diet for 2 weeks. And what they found was that the ultra-processed diet did not stimulate the PYY satiety hormone, nor did it overcome the ghrelin hunger hormone. So ghrelin stayed high, PYY stayed low. That was on the ultra-processed side of things. They also ate much faster, ate on average 500 more calories a day, and gained weight. Then on the other 2 weeks, on the unprocessed diet, PYY was stimulated throughout the diet, ghrelin stayed low, they ate slower, they ate less. I mean, it just so many great things happened on the unprocessed side of things. But when you look at a study like that, people immediately think, well, if you want to be in a calorie deficit, if you want to eat healthy, let's go for unprocessed foods. And that's a good conclusion to come to. But at the same time, people don't think about trying to be in a surplus and trying to gain muscle. When you're trying to gain muscle, going back to ultra-processed food not being inherently bad, if you're trying to be in a calorie surplus and struggling to do so, it may be a good idea to include more ultra-processed foods so that you're not, to get better control of PYY and ghrelin, and also just not have that ultra full feeling all the time, because again, more processed food is not going to have the same effect on how our body perceives it. You'll be less full from it, you'll be less satiated from it, and that's why typically people, when they eat ultra processed foods, they're hungry quicker, they crave more food quicker, things of that nature. So ultra processed food is something that's good to utilize when trying to be in a surplus. So we can also use it for the surplus side of things too. So looking at all three of these strategies, again, just terrific, very powerful strategies for wanting to change body composition, both for the deficit, for losing weight, and for the surplus, for gaining weight. Go ahead and give it a try.